All right. Well, we're going to pivot to a very important topic that I think we all, maybe some of you do, maybe some of you don't, but the NFL kickoff rule. You heard about it, you heard about the changes. Um, First time you saw it was this past game with the Texans and the Bears.
Yep.
It's very interesting. I'm excited about it. I know some people aren't. I am. I think it adds a whole new dimension, brings that kickoff back into something that is important again. So this is why. Let me read this real quick. To address the lowest kickoff return rate in NFL history during the 2023 season and an unacceptable injury rate on kickoffs prior to that, NFL clubs have approved a new kickoff rule for the 2024 season, which most of you have heard a little bit about. The new rule will keep the excitement of kickoff returns in the game while returning the injury rate closer to a traditional scrimmage play, which is all good, right? We want to see that kickoff mean something. And I think before we get into it, we're going to go to the whiteboard and we're going to explain it. And hopefully by the end of this, we'll all be ready to start the season. We'll have a good idea. But Jake, I did a lot of research on this. They don't have it all laid out. You can't go to one place and get every little detail. So I'm going to share with you what I found out. There's a couple questions I have at the end. Maybe you know, maybe you don't. But before I get into that, the XFL has had something similar. I think one of the only differences is they can't start moving until a player touches the ball. Whereas with this new rule, it's whether the player touches the ball or it hits the ground in the landing zone. We're going to talk about that in a second. But is it the XFL that's had this now for a few years?
Yeah, and it's funny because now, so the UFL, because they've since merged,
Yeah.
so they had this rule, and now they're reverting back to the old kickoff rule.
You're
So
kidding me.
they kind of switched. Yeah, super weird.
Any reason that so they're like the test was failed?
I don't know. And I think what they did with the old, well, with I guess now you call it the old kickoff rule, is they actually moved it back, so there weren't as many touchbacks. So it was still that old kickoff rule, but it wasn't going out of the end zone every time, which I thought maybe was a viable option for the NFL. It probably would make sense, right? Because you want more returns. But the biggest thing they're avoiding is that full speed collision from so far apart, right? So it does make sense. I kind of like the layout for it. So yeah, I'm ready to dive into it, Mike.
Oh, let's get into it here. All right, let's start with these zones that we're going to be talking about here. As you can see here, we got the whiteboard, Jake. It's kind of cool, right?
I love this. Yeah.
We can draw things. We can remove it. So again, this should help us all out. So the kickoff is going to start. The kicker is going to be kicking from the 35-yard line, right?
Which that has not changed. That's where it has been. Yes.
Yep, 100%. So no change there. The kickoff start line, that's the 40-yard line of the receiving team. And all 10 players have to have a foot on the 40-yard line. Okay. So again, this is the kickoff team. They have to have all 10 other players with a foot on the 40-yard line. The setup zone is the receiving team. They are a minimum of 9 players have to be in the setup zone. A minimum of 7 of those have to have their foot on the 35-yard line. And you're going to see another slide here that'll kind of, bring it all together for you. But and then you have the option of having 2 kickoff returners, right? And you could decide, I don't know why you ever would, to only have 1, and then you would bring 10 into that setup zone. And if you do that, 8 minimum players have to have their foot on the 35-yard line. Now, those two, the setup zone and the kickoff start line, they cannot move until the ball. Let me just go through this real quick. Boom. I'm going to give you my best kick. You hear that? Boom. It's a high one, right?
Love it. Yeah.
Now, I want you to know the kicker can start the run, but the kicker has to stay at the 50-yard line until it hits the landing zone or the player touches the ball. So again, he can get a little running start, stop at the 50-yard line. Honestly, I think the kicker's going to stay there anyway because he's trying to prevent, if anything gets through, he's the last chance to prevent a big a touchdown. So anyhow, he kicks the ball. He can run up to the 50. He has to wait. Everybody there in the kickoff start line in the setup zone is standing still. They're just looking and waiting for something to happen here. Now, real quick, I'm going to tell you something here. If the ball lands short of the 20-yard line, it's immediately blown dead, and the receiving team takes the ball at the 40-yard line, exactly as if it went out of bounds. We had that last
Mhm.
year, had that for years. The ball goes out of bounds, it goes to the 40-yard line. So think of it as another out of bounds, right? Before the 20, it's blown dead. These guys hadn't moved on the kickoff start line and the setup zone. They don't have to move. Play over. Interesting there, right, Jake? I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
It's gonna bring
And
the accuracy on these kickers are gonna be important.
absolutely. And it's almost like gone are the old pooch kick, the old pooch
Squib
kick
kick's
and
gone.
squib
It's
kicks.
it's
And yeah,
gone.
right, right. I mean, I guess you could still do it, right? You just got to make sure it lands, it touches the ground in that landing zone. So, yeah,
Yeah.
agreed.
So again, if the kicker kicks off, he's aiming for that landing zone. He hits that landing zone. This is the sweet spot. Once it's in the landing zone, the rule is you have to return it. You have to
Right.
return it. I mean, I one of the questions are like, well, can they still fair catch it? No. If they fair catch it or give themselves up, you're going to be wherever you caught that ball, wherever you gave yourself up, right? So that's going to happen there. But if it hits that landing zone, you have to return it. Um, let's go back here a little bit. So we talked about that 40-yard line. Remember, it's if it goes out of bounds, if this guy booms the ball, hits in the landing zone, goes out of bounds, guess what? They get the ball at the 40-yard line. Now, something else is coming to play here is the 30-yard line. What are you talking, Mike? What are you talking about? Right. So the initial submission for the rule was the 35-yard line. Now, let me tell you when that happens. So if guy kicks the ball off and he just overshoots the landing zone, goes into the end zone. If they don't return it and they kneel down or fair catch it, or it goes out of the end zone, guess what? It's coming to the 30-yard line. The initial submission said 35-yard line. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. I like that. I like that the penalty would be more severe, 35-yard line. Reason I like that is because, again, imagine, teams late in the game that might be behind are going to put a special player out there. Like Tyreek Hill comes to mind. I'm going to hit you
Yeah.
up with a scenario later on. But 30-yard line, Tyreek Hill's out there. I'm probably saying kick the ball to the end zone. So I don't want you to answer that. I'm going to say let him go. Let him start at the 30. If they see that the normal return is averaging around 28, 29-yard line, just kick it out of the end zone. Let's not even risk it, right? So that's where it goes to the 30-yard line. Again, they miss the landing zone. It goes into the end zone. They don't return it. They down it, or they fair catch it, or it just goes out of the end zone, 30-yard line. Let me stop right there. I'm going quick. Jake, you following me? Am I explaining okay? Any
This is
questions you have or
beautiful.
any insights you want to add?
The only insight I want to add is if on the off chance, which we did see on Thursday, if there's some inclement weather and the wind is blowing like crazy, back before, there would always be one of the players from the
Right.
kickoff team that was aligned next to the kicker. They would come over and hold the football. Now, in this case, because the players are starting farther up and their kicker is by himself, we saw on Thursday the Bears, Cairo Santos, who was kicking the ball off their kicker, they actually had Torrey Taylor, their punter, come in as basically a 12th man, and then he ran off the field as soon as the ball was kicked. So they are not considered an active player. They are just simply there to hold the ball. And once that ball is kicked off, they have to run off the field to the sideline. They're not allowed to participate in that play. But like I said, if there is some wind, it would call for that 12th player to come out onto the field and hold the football.
Yeah. So you actually saw that, right? That happened in that
Yep.
game? Okay,
And it was
good.
hilarious to see because Cairo Santos is 5'8", Torrey Taylor's 6'4", so he's just towering. He looks like this massive giant compared to Cairo Santos. And it's funny because we're talking kickers and punters here, right? Torrey Taylor's a big dude though. But yeah, so that's
Yeah.
exactly what would happen.
Yeah. So the other one is now there's a 20-yard line comes into play. And let me tell you what that is. So if kicker nails it, hits the landing spot, and somehow it gets to the end zone and they down it, or even if it goes out of the end zone, they're gonna have to take it at the 20-yard line, Jake. So last year the starting what was 25-yard line. So we have 20-yard line in play, 30-yard line in play, 40-yard line in play. Very, very interesting. The only thing and we'll talk about it a little later, is that 30-yard. I like the initial submission where they were saying it should have been at the 35-yard line.
Yeah.
And I already said a reason why, but we'll get into it deeper. So those are the different zones. Again, remember the kicker cannot run past the 50-yard line until that ball hits the ground or a player touches it. So he's stuck at the 50-yard line. Everyone else, it's interesting. And let me bring it up real quick. Let me bring up the next little thing here we're going to use. All right, so this is from the actual game, right? This is the first kickoff ever done with the new rule. You can see all 10 from the kickoff team were lined up on the 40-yard line. They have to have 1 foot. There's a second guy returning. He's off to the left. You can't see it on this view, but trust me, there's 2 returners back there. And as you can see, if you count the receiving team's players that have their foot on the 35, there's 7 of them, right? 4, 5, 6, 7. And then the 2 that are off the line of 35, they have to be outside the hash marks. They have to be on the outside. They can't be in the middle. They have to be on the outside. And again, if for whatever reason, now they can be, there's no rule that says they can't come up on the 35-yard line as well, but I'm not sure why they would do that. So again, they want somebody to be a little bit back. They're the only 2. There's only 2 that can actually be off that line. If you decide to have 1 kick returner, like I said, now an eighth person has to put his foot on that 35-yard line. And then the other 2 can do what they're doing here. That makes sense?
Yep.
Am I explaining that? I'm going to go as slow as we can to kind of answer any questions, and I'll go over here to the channel real quick because I want to make sure I'm answering some questions. Yeah, Keith saying, I love the squib kick. It's gone. It's gone, my friend. I thought I saw someone. I don't think the Dolphins would risk their player they're paying second most on a kickoff. Well, maybe not, but I don't know if it's the end of the game. And, I don't want to mention a 13-second game. Maybe the whole point of this is there's less risk of injury, right? It's supposed to be pretty much like a scrimmage play, a regular play, the risk of injury. Now, there's a big risk, but I don't know. If Tyreek Hill's back there, it really makes the other team have to make some important decisions. It would scare the heck out of me, and I doubted, Jessica, that anyone would be daring enough to kick him the ball. I really do.
Yeah, because I mean, speed kills first off, and all you have to do is get through that first line of defense, and then he's gone.
Dude, they're all bunched up. They're all bunched up, and he sees the seam. Now, there's talks of running backs. Put a running back there who just has that vision and is able to see that seam, hits that seam. Good night. I doubt that the kicker is going to make a play there. But this was the first one.
To Weston's point too, Mike, real quick, talking about special players that you could potentially use there. Luis Reese-Zammit is a former rugby player, and I think this is set up perfectly for a former rugby guy. So let's call Christian Wade back up to the Buffalo Bills here, former rugby player that played with the Bills. Maybe he could be something special on this kickoff team now, right?
Yep.
Love it, Weston.
Yeah, so imagine this guy kicks the ball, right? None of these guys on the 40 or the 30. Now, they are kind of looking back. So I think, Jake, there's an opportunity there because I hate the fact that if I was on that 35-yard line, I have to kind of look back. You have to see where the ball's going. You have to understand. And then you guys, they've called their play ahead of time. If it comes over to the left, we're running this. If it goes to the right or center, they have their plays, but they got to wait. They kind of got to look back a little bit. And I think if they can see where the ball's going, maybe there's someone on the line on the 35 who makes a signal, or they're looking at the kickoff team. At that point, they turn to the kickoff team, and they're just waiting for them to make their move because those guys are going to start moving, right? Anyhow, it's interesting. I think the first one went over here to this guy over to the left, and he returned it to about, I think it was around the 26-yard line, somewhere around there. Honestly, if that kicker's kicking the ball short, you should easily get over the 30-yard line almost every time. If that kicker isn't nailing it within the 10-yard line. But dude, that's where the beauty of this comes in. That kicker now is going to have to be very accurate. By the way, if you imagine this, you get a safety. Okay. The safety now, the kicker has to kick from the 20-yard line, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. The kickoff team has to kick from the 20-yard line. Everything else stays the same, even with penalties. They do not shift the 40-yard and the 35-yard line. All that stays exactly the same. The kicker is the only one who moves, who changes based on a penalty, based on a safety. Can you imagine having you get a safety? Man, it's going to be. I feel right now safeties uh, are kind of easy to cover, but now it's not going to be. They're kicking from their 20-yard line, and they have to get it within the landing spot, or that guy's going to get to maybe
And
the
remember,
40-yard line or the 30.
that's a punt too. That's not a normal kickoff. So that also adds to the
Well,
mystery of
they
things.
can decide to choose to kick off like a regular one, right? They have that option.
Oh,
Did
really?
you?
I actually
Yeah,
didn't know that.
yeah. So they can punt or kick it on a tee. Most of them punt, I think, for hang time, right?
Gotcha. That
But
makes
there's
sense.
hang time doesn't matter anymore. Kick it as high as you want. Who cares? I don't know.
Right.
All these guys are just waiting around. These guys are all waiting around until that ball touches the grass or the ground or a player, and they start moving. So
It's
hang
awesome.
time isn't really a factor. I guess it just depends on who thinks they're more accurate about hitting that landing zone. Is it the punter coming out or is it the kicker? I don't know what. I don't know. It depends on your team, I guess.
Yeah. And I think aesthetically right now it looks super weird to people, but I think this is a really good rule because I mean this play was essentially out of football. And the whole goal of this is to keep this play in football. And I mean it's poetic, right? Devin Hester goes into the Hall of Fame over this weekend, and the first time this rule is debuted is the Thursday before he goes into the Hall. So, and the Bears are playing, of course, right? So, it is a kind of cool situation. And yeah, I mean, we saw all returns while this happened on Thursday. So, I'm encouraged by it.
Yeah, I like it. Now, one thing again, I heard from, so I was watching researching this Mike Florio from the Pro Football Talk.
Mm-hmm.
He basically said one of the special teams coaches, maybe from the Packers, told them that there might be some slight changes prior to the regular season starting. Might be. So they're going to kind of want to see what happens here. And again, maybe that 30-yard line versus the 35-yard line. Instead of being at the 30, they take you out to the 35 if you um, boot that ball into the end zone and miss the landing zone. But they're waiting to see what's going to happen. And you got to be thinking, Jake, that there's some geniuses out there already figuring out what to do, right? What's going to take it? What's going to be the biggest advantage? And I think early on, until the players or until teams start showing their hand, I think we're going to see some big plays here that could alter the outcome of a game. Early on, there might be a big advantage. What's your thoughts on that?
100%. Yeah. I mean, I think it also kind of changes teams' mindsets now. Like, you have to prioritize a good returner, like for roster spots, too. I mean, I think, you know, we go and draft Daquan Hardy in the 6th round. I don't know if he's getting drafted in the 6th round if it isn't for this rule, right? Like, maybe he's an undrafted free agent instead of a 6th round pick. So it really does alter a lot of strategies, not just in terms of how you play guys on the field, but even in drafting and offseason moves now. So pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I think too. I mean, I think I read too. One of the things that the returners could do. Let's say this ball's not as high as this should be. It's coming down. It's going to clear. It's going to clear the landing zone. It's going to land in there, but it's low. This returner could come up outside the
Still
20.
return it.
Well, also, I think it gets blown dead. I think. I think it's
As soon
considered.
as it hit, yeah, as soon as it hits the ground, I believe. But if he catches, he could still run up and catch it there, which I think that's what you're saying, right?
You can run up and catch it, but I think it gets called for the 40-yard line. I think it gets called
Oh,
as it hit before the 20. I think
okay.
so. There's just some of the questions. Like my three big questions are for this, and again, we'll come back again. I know there might be some questions from the chat. Three questions I had as far as these lineups. I was looking for alignment rules. Could I put all 10 players on the right side of the field? I couldn't find anything that said what the alignment
Hmm.
rules were. Could I put, overload this side? I don't know. Could these folks, the returning team, overload one side or whatever? I couldn't find anything as far as alignment rules other than the fact that they had to have their foot on the 40-yard line and the receiving team had to have a minimum of 7 players on the 35-yard line. And if they brought up, like I said, one of the returners, they'd have to have 8th person with their foot on the line. So that
Right.
was one of the questions I had. And then the other one was, what if, remember, this is a human being making this play. What if this kick, the ball hits right around the 20. And everyone we can see it's in the landing zone. But no, he says it's not in the landing zone. So it immediately goes
Mm,
to the 40
yeah,
yard line. Am I going to have to waste a challenge on this?
interesting. Yeah, it's a great
Right?
question, Mike.
I
Yeah,
don't know because like some of those things are going to be close. The tip of that ball could just hit slightly inside the 20 or hit the 20-yard line, but they're saying no, it didn't reach. So those are
yeah,
let's see, 3 questions. Oh, can I fair catch? I think I answered that early. No, you're supposed to return it. If you give yourself up on a play, you make that mistake. For instance, boom, I'm going to hit the landing zone right here. This guy, for some reason, makes a fair catch or gives himself up. Guess what? You get the ball at the 5-yard line.
right there. Yeah,
Like last year, what would happen, right? If I made a fair catch inside the 20, what happened? I got to
it would
go to
just
the
go right. Yeah,
25
exactly.
yard line, right? Get to start
Yep.
there. No more, no more. So I kind of love this. I see some folks out there really harping on, Tyreek Hill not coming in. Just an example. Just an example. But
Yeah,
I'm saying the game's on the line, and you know, and he's your best player, and you don't have anyone else, and this is to, I don't know, go to the Super Bowl, win the AFC Championship game, maybe, maybe. Otherwise, you potentially are going to put somebody good out there. I think that's going to be the case. So I don't know, Jay. I'm a big fan of it. I think it brings back this important part of the game that we've been missing, and I think there's going to be so many different strategies we learn, and I think earlier is where teams are going to take advantage. Somebody's going to have some amazing play, and we're like, oh my god! Again, I wish I knew. If anyone knows, anyone out there in the chat right now, or anyone knows on the rewatch, can these formations be changed, or are they pretty much? Because every picture I've seen, and let me bring up another one just real quick. Pretty much shows that, right? They all have to be kind of spaced out evenly, 35-yard line, and then the two players here that are off the line, they have to be outside the hash marks here, can't be inside. So I don't know, Jake. What do you think? You think they can change where they're lining up? Like, can
I don't
all
think so.
ton of them?
I think they have to keep it somewhat standard, so it's probably 5 and 5, on the outside of the kicker there. So I feel like as far as the kickoff team, it has to be that way, and then the kickoff return team, I'm sure they can play with it a little bit. There's a little more freedom there, but yeah, I think the kickoff team is pretty standard. You know what
I,
excites me though, Mike? So you
yeah.
see how these guys are back, obviously right on the back heel of these other guys on the line of scrimmage for the return team.
Hmm.
I think this is really cool because you can essentially, if you're running a return left or return right, you can have one of those guys just off that guy's, heel, right? You can almost have them lead, like as a lead blocker, kind of come
Yeah.
off that left side or right side. So, and then vice versa for like the kickoff team, you can have some stunts run. Jessica, reading my mind. Absolutely love it. Think a lot of stunts will be used to get the gunners released. Absolutely. I mean, the creativity is really going to come into play, and you're going to see some of these special teams coaches thrive. I mean, this is a good example. I think they did do some of that. Frank Ross, special teams coach. Shout out to Frank Ross, John Carroll guy. Love that dude. Frank Ross, special teams coach. I think it's his 4th year now with the Texans. One of the better ones in the league. He was trying to be a little creative during this game, and it's going to be cool to see some of these guys, some of these gurus, divvy up some cool stuff.
Yep. I love it. And we'll see. We'll see. We're gonna find out all the cool plays. And I don't think anyone's gonna show their hand. Why would you? Why would you show your hand? Because I think the biggest advantage comes early in the season, Jake.
Yeah.
When we start to see these plays be put in place. But they're going to make a difference in a few games where a team that had no chance, all of a sudden, one of these plays wins the game for them. It's gonna happen.
Oh, absolutely.
We should talk about the onside rule. It has
Yeah.
changed. It has changed. You cannot use the onside kick until the fourth quarter, and you have to. Everyone has to know about it. It's no secret. There are no more secret onside kicks. You have to be. You have to declare it. Everyone, both teams will know, and you can only use it in the fourth quarter if your team's behind, Jake. So big change there, right?
Yep.
Big change.
Yep.
And again,
Yeah, I
I
know.
don't mind that. I hate those little sneaky little onside kicks when you're not expecting it. I don't like it, especially when they
You
burn us.
know, Yeah, you could. Here's the thing, though. I mean, you go back to even a Super Bowl between the Colts and Saints, right? They did that surprise onside kick coming out of the half, and I think it is, great to keep the other team on their toes. But I understand why you have to do it in this instance because the kicker is by himself, and there's this whole landing zone rule, so it does make sense. I don't like that you have to do it, or you're only allowed to do it when you're coming from behind. I
Yeah.
think you should be able to do it whenever you want, but alerting the other team to do it, it does make sense.
Yeah, so the onside kick is exactly the way it was last year, right? They don't line up like this. There's no special lineup. It is the onside kick like
Normal.
it used to be, right?
Yep.
Exactly. Other than only fourth quarter, only if you're behind. So
Yeah.
interesting stuff there.